Hi, I'm Hal Roberts. This is Bridge City News. Here's some of the top stories we've been following. An investigation has been launched by the Ethics Commissioner to see if Alberta Premier Daniel Smith interfered with the administration of justice in relation to COVID-19 prosecution. We hear from a Lethbridge veteran who made his way to France in honor of the 106th anniversary of the Battle of Vimy Ridge. And another mass shooting takes place in the United States, this one leaving 4 people dead at a bank in Kentucky.
Your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News with Hal Roberts.
Thanks so much for joining us. Alberta Premier Daniel Smith has been contacted by the Ethics Commissioner. An investigation is being launched looking into whether or not the Premier interfered with the administration of justice in relation to COVID-19 prosecution. Now, this stems from allegations that Premier Smith's office contacted Crown prosecutors following a leaked video which shows Premier Smith having a conversation with controversial street preacher Arthur Pawlowski, who faces charges stemming from the Coutts border protest. In a released statement, the Premier's office had this to say: the Premier welcomes the investigation and is fully cooperating with the Commissioner and is confident this examination will confirm there has been no such interference. As a result of the ongoing investigation, it would be inappropriate for the Premier to comment on this further until the investigation is completed. Premier Smith is threatening legal action against the CBC if the corporation does not retract or apologize for reporting about the Premier and COVID-19 related criminal cases related to last year's Coutts blockade. An Alberta RCMP officer from the Sherwood Park detachment east of Edmonton died after being injured in a crash on Monday morning around 2 a.m. Police say Constable Harvinder Singh Dhami was an officer who was not only well liked at his precinct, but also in his community.
Constable Dhami was involved in a motor vehicle accident while responding to assist members with a noise complaint. While en route to the call, his vehicle struck a large concrete abutment or barrier. Despite efforts of the emergency personnel and civilians on scene, Harvey succumbed to his injuries. Constable Dhami graduated Depot in 2019 and was posted to the Strathcona Municipal Detachment. Right from the time he started at Depot, Harvey was known as someone who was mature, with a strong sense of responsibility. He was hardworking, dependable, and so well liked by everyone around him. This was so evident this morning in speaking with his watchmates and colleagues here in the detachment.
Constable Dhami leaves behind his wife, Ravinder. The incident is still under investigation. His death is the latest law enforcement tragedy to occur in the Edmonton area over the past few weeks. 2 Edmonton police officers were killed in the line of duty on March 16th. Constables Travis Jordan and Brett Ryan were gunned down after responding to a domestic dispute call. The suspect, a 16-year-old, also shot and injured his mother before turning the gun on himself. At least 4 people were killed this morning in the 15th mass shooting and killing in the United States so far this year. At least 9 others were also injured when a man opened fire in a bank in downtown Louisville, Kentucky. 2 police officers were wounded, with 1 in critical condition. Police arrived as gunshots were still being fired inside of the Old National Bank. The shooter is dead, but it's not clear if he killed himself or was shot by police. It is the 106th anniversary of the Battle of Vimy Ridge, which took place from April 9th through the 12th, 1917, during the First World War. Over 100,000 Canadians served and fought bravely during the battle. Bridge City News chatted with Lethbridge veteran Glenn Miller about his trip to the Canadian National Vimy Memorial in France. He explains why we should always remember the important sacrifices that our veterans made for us so that we may enjoy the freedoms we have today. BCN's Micah Quinn has the details.
It's a very powerful monument. It's not a tribute to war, it's a tribute to the sacrifice that Canadians have made.
Glenn Miller told us he first went to France to view the Canadian National Vimy Memorial back in the early 1980s as a student. He's been there multiple times since, and on Sunday, he was back for a special commemoration event with a school group from the Lethbridge Collegiate Institute. Miller said the Vimy Monument has a rich history.
The Mother Canada, who's mourning all of her dead as she looks down over the plain, and on top of the sarcophagus representing a soldier's grave. Very emotional. It's a very powerful monument, even back when it was originally opened up in 1936 by the King. And as part of the war delegation, many of Albertans and other Canadians were part of that initial pilgrimage back in 1936.
According to staff from the Government of Canada, more than 7,000 Canadian soldiers were wounded and 3,600 were killed in the Battle of Vimy Ridge.
April the 9th is Vimy Ridge Day, the anniversary of one of the most significant battles in Canadian military history. That spring morning in 1917, all 4 divisions of the Canadian Corps fought together for the very first time as one formation. And within hours of bravely going over the top of their trenches, they've taken most of Vimy Ridge. By April the 12th, it was entirely in Allied hands, lest we forget.
On top of his trip to the Canadian National Vimy Memorial in France, Miller says he's been doing some legwork for the Liberation of the Netherlands Museum, which will recognize Indigenous veterans who have been buried in the country. That event will be taking place on June 21st. For Bridge City News, I'm Micah Quinn.
Well, it appears as though we may be seeing a serious shortage of workers in the agricultural sector over the next 10 years. According to a recent report by RBC, 40% of farm operators will retire by the year 2033. There will also be a severe shortfall of 24,000 general workers on farms, nurseries, and greenhouses over the same time period. The study also said that 66% of those producers have no successors in place, which puts agriculture on the cusp of the biggest labor and leadership shortage in Canada's history. Now, the director of the Alberta Wheat Commission, Dave Bishop, says it's a huge problem with not a lot of solutions in sight for producers.
There's lots of farms where, maybe none of their children want to farm, or the parents are saying maybe we can't afford to have them farm. So, it's going to be, I would say maybe even less than 10 years, we'll be seeing some changes coming. And I don't know if it's all going to be for the good, because we may have to see larger farms, be more amalgamation of the smaller farms into bigger farms. And I can see more and more of that coming. I think it's just the natural evolution of what's going on in the farm industry right now.
As part of the RBC report, it was suggested that in the short term, permanent immigration status should be given to 24,000 general farm workers and 30,000 operators to bridge retirement and staffing gaps. Dr. LeRoy Little Bear is the Vice Provost of Inniskim Indigenous Relations at the University of Lethbridge. He says he's pretty optimistic for his people who are part of the Blackfoot Confederacy. Little Bear says he hopes that the next generation of Blackfoot people receive a better education and become solid contributing members of society.
My hope for their future is to come to institutions of higher learning, whether it be University of Lethbridge or elsewhere, but to make it comfortable for them, make it kind of like luxury for them to come to an institution, have the luxury to go to play around with ideas, concepts, and so on, so that, hey, when they leave the institution as graduates, hey, they'll become good contributing citizens. They'll become good, contributing members of their communities.
Make sure you catch the entire interview with Dr. LeRoy Little Bear from the U of L and BCN's Jeanette Rocher coming up in the second half of our program. A number of cases in Canada are still before the courts for those who were charged during the COVID-19 lockdowns. Leighton Gray is a lawyer from Cold Lake, Alberta, who has fought for those who say they're standing up for their constitutional rights and freedoms. He also hosts the show Gray Matter here on Miracle Channel. Leighton joins us now from Cold Lake. Leighton, can you share some of the highlights of cases being heard in court these days?
Well, we've been examining this a lot on our show on Gray Matter. One interesting interview that we just conducted was with a couple of lawyers who launched a petition which was opposed to mandatory racial sensitivity training being imposed by the Law Society. We had them on, and they talked about why this is wrong and why it's a dangerous intrusion into freedom of speech and freedom of expression. One interesting side note there is that one of the lawyers, Roger Song, actually emigrated from China, was raised in China, became a lawyer there, and he emigrated to Canada in order to live in a society that is much more free. And during the interview, he talked about some of the alarming symmetries between the indoctrination he experienced in China, the cultural training that he received there, and what seems to be on the rise in Canada. So that was a very interesting interview. We also had the opportunity to speak with James Kitchen, who's conducting a number of really important cases in this sphere. And we had him on the show talking with his guest or his client, Curtis Wall, who is a chiropractor who was actually unable to practice for a period of time because he refused to wear a mask during COVID, despite the fact that none of his patients had any problem with it. And of course, now we know that the masks simply don't work. That seems to be the scientific consensus, if there ever is one. So those are a couple of examples of the types of topics that we've been talking about on Grey Matter.
Now, you mentioned that Dr. Wall's case centers around mask wearing, and an unknown group essentially lodged formal complaints. Now, is this classified as activism more so than legitimate complaints?
In that situation, it could be called that, but it's a matter of perspective. From Dr. Wall's perspective, there were two things at play. First of all, he's a Christian, and fundamentally, he found this to be a rights issue. That's important. But secondly, and I think this is really key, he was concerned about how it made him feel. He found that it changed the way that he felt about his work. It changed the way he related to his patients. He was less engaged with them and always concerned about and just couldn't get over having this mask on his face. And, in hindsight, the way that masks were presented to us, the way that they were mandated, the way that they were forced on us in public spaces, you can call people like Curtis Wall or myself conspiracy theorists, but it's possible, it's just possible that may have been the whole point of masking. That is to dehumanize us, to make us feel uncomfortable in our own skins, and of course to inhibit our interaction with each other, our natural interactions with each other.
Leighton, some Canadians are saying that judges and other influencers in Canada's legal system have made some pretty bold statements on where they personally stand on these very controversial issues, potentially showing some bias. What do you think is the trickle-down effect with this?
Well, I think the trickle-down effect is that people are losing confidence in the independence and the integrity of our cherished institutions. And I'm talking about education, I'm talking about justice, I'm talking about healthcare, I'm talking about government and parliament. And it's very, very important in a functioning society, particularly a free society, for people to have that basic trust in the independence and the integrity of that system. And that system only has the integrity of the people who operate within it.
Thanks so much, Leighton. Leighton Gray is a lawyer from Cold Lake, Alberta, who can be seen on Return to Reason. Make sure you catch new content each and every Thursday right here on Miracle Channel. Well, as the weather warms up, more and more cities are seeing tent encampments pop up. A handful of homeless people set up tents along a stretch of Vancouver's Hastings Street the police and city crews cleared just the day before. An advocate says those who lost their homes recently are even more vulnerable.
I'm one of very many average people that, have family, friends, anyone out there. You'd look at me and wouldn't think that, I've experienced any type of, homelessness or things like that. But, I have, and it's, I think putting a face on that, it can happen to anyone from things like going on disability. You only make $1,000 a month in disability, and that's a new, statistic. They just upped the budget. So imagine paying rent in Vancouver and all your groceries and your transit on $1,000 a month.
It's horrific, right? Because last night not only did they remove using paramilitary tactics, a handful of tents, but really disrupting the community. Like their action, by occupying Hastings Street for pretty much the entire day, access to life-saving services like Insight and Crosstown Clinic were blocked. We were talking to the workers there. People go there for their daily dispensing of medicine, treatment. They didn't see a bunch of their clients that day. They were not given a heads up by the police or the city. And so we're worried that this action and the continued action will have cascading effects on the community in terms of overdose death, people missing treatments, they couldn't go to the bank yesterday because they also blocked off this area. Again, people have been banished from the neighborhood, right? They have no place to really go.
Meanwhile, in the central part of the country, fallen trees littered a street in a neighborhood north of downtown Montreal as an ice storm left one person dead and cut power to more than 1 million homes. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau toured the damaged area over the weekend.
It's a very difficult moment for Montrealers, for people across the region who have been hit by this ice storm. Obviously, the power being down for so many folks, the trees coming down, hurting buildings, and it's important that people do what we always do in times of difficulty. Neighbors will be there for neighbors. People will help out and support. The federal government is here to support in any way we can. I'm here today as an MP for Papineau. This is my district, my riding, and I'm happy to be able to meet with some of the folks who've been affected. We will be, and of course, as a federal government, there to support in any way necessary. There haven't been any formal requests, but if there are, we will say yes. I'm going to be getting a briefing from Eagle Quebec with the Premier.
Canada's Brad Gouchou settled for silver at the World Men's Curling Championships. The Canadian foursome dropped a 9-3 decision to Scotland's Bruce Mowat.
I felt like we were playing really good over the last couple days. We knew we had to switch hammer early, and obviously the two in the second end put us in a little bit of a hole, and then in the third end they played a great end, and my second rock for some reason slid a whole lot better than my first rock and gave up a steal or two, and at that point we knew it was an uphill battle. We had to take some chances, and we took those chances, and it didn't work out for us. It was disappointing. We wanted to put on a better show than what we did today, but Bruce didn't allow us. Credit to them. They played an awesome game.
The U.S. Navy is sending a nuclear submarine to the Middle East. It's apparently in retaliation to an attack U.S. personnel faced in Syria that left one person dead and 12 military members injured. Our foreign affairs expert Lisa Daftari says adding a sub like this to be stationed in Bahrain may escalate the situation.
It's interesting because on the one hand, obviously the Biden administration does not want another war. They never wanted any war, but meanwhile, they got themselves into all of these different pickles. That is because of the weak foreign policy coming out of the West right now. There are consequences, right, Hal? And that's exactly what this shows us, that there are consequences when there's weak foreign policy. Our enemies will take advantage. But the fact that we're sending a submarine, that should be some sort of escalation, regardless of whether or not President Biden wants to admit it is one. It is a military escalation, and we're going to show that we will have presence there.
Our foreign affairs expert Lisa Daftari will also have the latest on the tensions between China and Taiwan coming up in the second half of our program. 48-year-old Oscar-winning actress Hilary Swank has given birth to twins. Yeah, 48 years old. She posted a picture of herself with her newborn boy and girl on Instagram with the caption reading, "It wasn't easy, but boy and girl, was it worth it." Swank has been married to entrepreneur Philip Schneider since 2018 and had to conceal her pregnancy from the cameras as she filmed her new show, Alaska Daily. 48 years old having twins. Wow. That's a bit of a wow factor as well with our weather here today in southwestern Alberta. It felt more like summer than spring across our region, and the warmer temperatures should be sticking around. Full weather details are coming up. Well, we enjoyed a gorgeous Easter Monday here in Lethbridge. Lots of sunshine, and we hovered around that 20-degree mark. Tonight, expect a few clouds developing with a low near 6. Tomorrow, expect a mixture of sun and cloud and a high near 18. Wednesday, the mercury will drop a little bit to 7 degrees. Just a few clouds and 8 degrees on Thursday. A mix of sun and cloud and 9 for Friday. An amazing weekend is shaping up. Expect lots of sunshine and 17 on Saturday, mainly clear at 22 degrees for Sunday. Now, the average high for this time of year is 12 degrees with an average low of -2. The record high was 24, set back in 1949. And our record low was a chilly -19 in 1990. The sun rose at 6:50 and set at 8:17. Let's see how the rest of the country is shaping up on Tuesday. Expect rain and a high of only 9 degrees in Victoria, showers and 8 degrees for Vancouver. Expect rain mixed with snow and a high of 5 degrees for Edmonton. A few showers and 10 degrees is on tap for Calgary tomorrow. Sunshine at 17 for Regina. A good chance of showers developing and a high of 9 for Saskatoon. It'll be partly cloudy with a high of 11 degrees in Winnipeg. In the central part of the country, it should be overcast and 20 degrees in Toronto. A slight chance of showers and 17 in Ottawa. A mixture of sun and cloud and 13 for Montreal. In Atlantic Canada, it'll be rainy and a high near 15 degrees for Fredericton, mainly cloudy and 16 for Halifax, clouds and 14 for Charlottetown, PEI, and in St. John's, Newfoundland, expect a mainly sunny day with a high near 10 degrees on Tuesday.
Today's weather report is brought to you by Ridge Utilities, providing competitive rates for electricity, natural gas, and internet, while investing back in communities across southern Alberta.
The Bank of Canada is scheduled to announce its next interest rate and release its update forecast for the economy in its monetary policy report on Wednesday. The central bank is widely expected by economists to keep its key interest rate target on hold at 4.5%, but its view of how the economy is unfolding will be scrutinized. Toronto-based mattress retailer Sleep Country will purchase Casper Sleep's Canadian operations. Officials say the deal is worth $20.6 million. Sleep Country says it will receive a $4.5 million marketing transition fee from the U.S. Mattress in a Box company over the next 4 years. It will also receive 3-year warrants that it will convert into a 1% stake in Casper. The deal comes as the number of e-commerce companies selling rolled mattresses and boxes to ship directly to customers has soared in recent years. Tesla is reportedly planning on building a new factory in China. Chinese state media reports the electric car maker will have a new facility in Shanghai to produce power storage devices for sale around the world. The company already operates an auto factory in the city. The factory is due to break ground in the third quarter of this year and start production in the second quarter of 2024. Now, here's a look at today's markets. The TSX was up 79 points on the day to finish at 20,275. The Dow was up 101 points to 33,586. The S&P 500 was up 4 on the day to 4109, and the Nasdaq was down 3 points to 12,084. West Texas Intermediate Oil was down 80 cents to $79.90 US per barrel. Natural gas was up 17 cents to $2.18 US. Gold was down $16.43 on the day to $19.91.48 US an ounce, and silver was even at $24.87 US an ounce. Feed wheat is at $11.51 per bushel, barley's at $9.17, canola's at $17.30, and corn is at $10.67 per bushel. Live cattle were up 30 cents to $171.38. Feeder cattle were also up 30 cents to $200.93, and lean hogs were down 78 cents to $73.38. The Canadian dollar was down slightly over the past 24 hours to 74 cents US. Recapping one of our top stories, Alberta Premier Danielle Smith has been contacted by the Ethics Commissioner. An investigation is being launched looking into whether or not the Premier interfered with the administration of justice in relation to a COVID-19 prosecution. The Premier's office says Smith welcomes the investigation, will cooperate, and is pretty confident it will determine she has done nothing wrong. An American nuclear submarine is on its way to Bahrain. It's in response to an attack on U.S. troops, which left 1 contractor dead and 12 service members injured in the Middle East. Our foreign affairs expert Lisa Daftari will have details for us momentarily. Listen, if you see news happening in your community, be sure to drop us an email at info@bridgecitynews.ca. We'd love to hear from you.
Here's today's Bridge City News community calendar. Commandos Motorcycle Club is partnering with Veteran Association Food Bank and Safeway Fairway Plaza to bring the Lethbridge Veterans Food Drive taking place Saturday, April 15th from 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. at 2750 Fairway Plaza in Lethbridge. The Veterans Association Food Bank is dedicated to supporting and enriching the lives of veterans and their families, so come on out and support a worthy cause. Celebrate Recovery is a Christ-centered recovery program for any hurt, hang-up, and habit. This group meets Friday nights at Park Meadows Baptist Church. The evening begins at 7 p.m. with a large group session, followed by small groups at 8 with coffee and dessert at 9. For more information, visit celebraterecovery.ca or call Park Meadows Church office at 403-327-4422. And that's today's Bridge City News community calendar.
With the recent attacks on American and Allied troops, the U.S. Navy said it was sending one of its more powerful nuclear-powered attack submarines to the Middle East. Now, to talk about this in more detail is the host of the Foreign Desk and our foreign affairs expert, Lisa Daftari, who joins us once again from the City of Angels, Los Angeles. Lisa, the deployment comes following an attack on U.S. personnel in northeast Syria, which injured 12 service members and killed a contractor. So what do you think is the main objective of the U.S. Navy sending this powerful submarine in?
Look, the objective is to say we are not going to take this and we are going to show up, which is the right thing to do. But juxtapose this with the podium talk of President Biden the day after these attacks on U.S. personnel, and he said we are not looking for an escalation, but there will be consequences. So it's interesting because on the one hand, obviously the Biden administration does not want another war. They never wanted any war, but meanwhile they got themselves into all of these different pickles. That is because of the weak foreign policy coming out of the West right now. There are consequences, right, Hal? And that's exactly what this shows us, that there are consequences when there's weak foreign policy. Our enemies will take advantage. But the fact that we're sending a submarine, that should be some sort of escalation, regardless of whether or not President Biden wants to admit it is one. It is a military escalation, and we're going to show that we will have presence there. Instead of pulling out of that region, we're getting further and more deeply involved, and that should send a clear message to our enemies that we are very serious and that we will not take any more attacks on our assets. Just want to point out, you mentioned this last week, and I mentioned it the week before that, but there have been 80 or more attacks on U.S. personnel in Iraq and Syria since the President Biden came into office. And I mentioned there's 33 or more attacks just since October of last year. So it's been very serious. And now I hope that this really is a deterrent of some sort.
Yeah, tensions escalating around the world. Lisa, as the world's eyes are on the war in Ukraine, it appears as though a war between China and Taiwan is imminent. China sent fighter jets towards Taiwan just days after House Speaker Kevin McCarthy met with Taiwan's president.
Right. So obviously China wasn't too happy with U.S. leaders getting close to Taiwan. They never like it when the U.S. doubles down on its support of Taiwan. But as you said, they also know that we are tied up in Ukraine, assets, money, weapons, military aid of all sorts going to Ukraine, and we are spread thin. And that is yet another vulnerability right now that China could take advantage of. If they want to at some point invade Taiwan, this would be the time to do so, to do it while the Biden administration is still in office, A, and B, while we are tied up in Ukraine with no end in sight of that war coming to any sort of close or resolution, but then taking advantage of the fact that these heightened tensions have to get to some sort of apex, right? So that's what we're basically waiting on here to see if they're going to play out the clock or if they're going to go for it. And it looks like China's trying to show the United States that they weren't too happy and that there will be consequences for that.
You know, with all of the support going to Ukraine over the past year, as you mentioned, I mean, Pentagon officials are realizing now that U.S. munition stockpiles are not nearly big enough. They're running low to take on China.
Right. Isn't that a shame? And not only to have this be a reality, but to say it out loud. Look how for years now we've been saying that while the Pentagon and other military arms of the U.S. military have been worried about pronouns, China has been marching on and developing its assets. I mean, when you look at how serious China is and how whimsical the United States has been in its military development, and it's taking China seriously as a threat during this administration. We've been saying it, many experts bringing it to their attention. And now day after day, there are more and more reports saying the U.S. is not ready to take on China. And yet, when we say we're going to support Taiwan, what does that mean? That means we would have to take on China. So these are all realities that are coming to a front. And the fact that there's a headline there, that doesn't help our cause. All our enemies are watching. It doesn't help the cause that they're knowing how vulnerable we are militarily. The fact that all of our attention is on indicting a former president rather than being more serious about our foreign policy, about wanting to weaken our assets throughout the world instead of being America first in our foreign policy, et cetera. So definitely, again, ripple effect, consequences to a weak foreign policy that are playing out all across the world.
Let me ask you something. How much do you think the West can actually rely on Japan amid tensions with China to be a strong ally for the West?
Look, the entire region is on board, meaning South Korea, Japan, Taiwan. They obviously are all with us, but how much can we rely on them in terms of a military power, in terms of military might? It's wonderful that we have geographic partners that will, obviously take them on and support us in this endeavor. But it's never a good place to be in terms of being the United States, the world's biggest superpower, to say that we are not ready to take on China, or that we do not have enough X, Y, and Z, and we would have to rely on regional partners to fill in the gaps. It's never a good place to be in. So I hope that this is a wake-up call to the White House, and it is something that we hope we don't have to get into, but something that we can be prepared for.
Lisa, the U.S. Justice Department has launched an investigation into the recent posting of classified Pentagon documents on various social media platforms. The 50 leaked documents were classified Ukraine war documents.
Yeah, it's unbelievable. Who's running the show here, right? And why does the United States have so many enemies in terms of, is this internal? Is this external? Is this a hack? How did these papers get out? And why are there so many classified documents now coming to the forefront? Where were these papers? How did they get there? Now an investigation is being launched. Whenever they say investigation being launched, again, Hal, a vulnerability. It's very weak to say that we are now running after, to put the pieces together. Why did this happen to begin with, right? Why do we have so many vulnerabilities and blind spots when it comes to our intelligence? I don't know how many superpowers in the world are running around saying, "Oh no, we have our intel posted on the web, or posted here, posted there." This is yet another vulnerability and something to look into. So I hope when they say this investigation is being launched, that they actually get to a point where they can stop the next one.
Iran is promising a strong and decisive response to Israel's recent airstrikes in Syria. They killed 2 Iranian military advisors. Lisa, the comments come amid an ongoing proxy war between Iran and Israel in Syria, where Iranian-backed forces have been coordinating terror attacks on the Jewish state.
Absolutely. Look, this is an interesting timing of such a threat, because Israel has been doing targeted just targeting specific places within Syria for years. That's been their way of setting the Iran regime back without getting into a full-fledged war between Iran and Israel. So they've been hitting quietly their assets there. Now, we're looking at 6 months of protests on the streets of Iran. We're hoping that the people of Iran are able to weaken their government, bring down their government, because as we've said many times, Hal, the Iran regime is good for nothing, right? They're egregious. They brutalize their own people. They put billions of dollars into global terror. They have blood on their hands. They have American, Canadian blood on their hands, European blood on their hands. So we're hoping that they become weakened. But in the interim, we know that the United States also said that they're trying to get another deal with Iran's regime. And then we know that they're also supporting, again, more terror against the state of Israel. They just were behind all those proxy attacks against U.S. assets in Syria and Iraq. So the fact, and the reason why I'm connecting all these dots is to get to this final point, is that the fact that the Iran regime is now making this threat means that they're sitting in a very comfortable spot, knowing that the United States is still after a deal with them, knowing that the United States is not condoning these terror attacks against Israel from Lebanon or from Gaza, knowing that they can do whatever they want and they can crack down on their protesters and crack down on their women for not wearing hijab, Islamic headscarf. So it's a big wake-up call to the White House to say, who are you trying to negotiate with? A bunch of bully terrorists that are bullying people, including Americans, all throughout the world. And now they have this breathing space, economic, military, etc., to come and make threats against Israel and the United States.
Amid escalating violence in the Middle East, Lisa, Hezbollah and Hamas leaders met in Beirut recently. The rocket attacks have been attributed to Hamas and have come from Lebanon, Syria, and Gaza.
Right. And a great segue there to say, the reason why these groups can unite is because their donor, their biggest sponsor is the same. It's the Iran regime. And that's why they are coming together, because of their main goal. So traditionally, these terror groups are always in competition for sponsorships, for donors, for recruits, right? To get people from Europe and Canada and the United States to go and fight alongside Hamas or Hezbollah or ISIS. And now you see them in cahoots. And that is because they are focused on the main goal, and that is diminishing Israel and and vis-a-vis the United States as well. This is, again, a huge message to us that they're getting a lot of money. Their goal is the same. They have weapons now. You're not seeing as many suicide bombings of Arabs going on to buses and into pizza shops to kill innocent Israelis that are just civilians living regular life. But in the past few attacks, we've seen them using handguns, going onto the streets, shooting people who are coming out of a bar. I mean, young people who have done nothing. They're just walking home from a night out with friends. Same goes with car rammings. If you have a car, you can kill people. That's a great deed you can do for your people. So the fact that they have become so bold and so brazen just points to the fact that they have the space to do so. There have been no punitive measures against them. And one other thing I want to point out is Donald Trump, under his presidency, he cut the funding to a lot of these Palestinian groups because of these pay-to-slave programs, where they were actually paying the families of martyrs, people who would kill Jews, would get paid a monthly salary. And that's why Donald Trump said, no more of this. We're not paying for terrorism with taxpayer money. President Biden reinstated that money. He started giving money back to these groups. You're seeing a lot more attacks, and that is, again, because of Iran's regime funding them, and because of President Biden, again, giving all this grant money to these groups.
Well, that's scary. Lisa, let's talk a bit about the protests taking place in France right now. More and more people are demanding that French President Emmanuel Macron resign. And a lot of it has to do with increasing the retirement age from 62 to 64. A lot of people are not happy with his leadership.
No, and a lot of people want to retire in Europe. If you've ever been to Europe, it's a pretty relaxed society, and they're very serious about their retirement. So, I mean, if you're in Canada or the United States, even people who are 70, 75, 80 are working, they're healthy, they don't mind. It's a different culture. The French are demanding that this does not happen. And you know what happens when people are in this perpetual protest mode is that they're not going to back down anytime soon. They want him gone. It's almost as if this very liberal, lax representative of the French people has fallen from their graces. So they're demanding that this reform not go through, that they get their retirement when they want it, and that things remain the same. So they continue to come out onto the streets, and this is throughout France. By the way, we're seeing it in multiple cities. It's not just in Paris, but yes, this is ongoing.
Bringing things a little closer to home now, Border Patrol agents have apprehended more than 10,000 migrants. That includes some sex offenders, 4 who had arrest warrants, and 1 who's even a gang member. Lisa, there were also a lot of illegal drugs and guns confiscated at the U.S.-Mexico border.
Yeah, this is a daily thing that goes on. And if you've been following the fallout at the border, you have Border Patrol saying something very different than the White House. You have a very difficult time for Border Patrol to be recruiting new people. The salaries are low, the demands are high, the stresses are high. They don't have the right resources or tools to stop this flow. It's like a bandage for a huge hemorrhage, and they cannot they can't contain it. I mean, who would want to even work such a job, a thankless job that is dangerous and, of course, difficult and very challenging. So this is a daily reality for those who are at the border. I know many reporters have gone down there to do a walk along. These numbers don't lie. It tells us a full story. And think about all those who are not stopped, who cannot be vetted. I know, Hal, you and I have many times talked about the fact that so many that are on the global terror list have been found at the border. Think about, again, those who have not been or not on the list, or have not been caught, or who have not been vetted. And we know bad actors are using the border. We're not saying that these bad actors are coming from the South American countries, but that bad actors from other parts of the world are using this vulnerable border to get through. And as it pertains to you, all of you in Canada, they're continuing north in many cases. And now we have a problem with our northern border as well, with these migrants traveling into Canada. So look, it's contagious, right? And I think, again, this bad foreign policy, it has a ripple effect. It has many consequences. I know the mayor of New York is fed up, even though he is very pro-migrant and very lax immigration laws. But now when he sees the reality of it in front of his eyes, when he sees how much money and resources have to go towards housing these migrants and placing them and getting them, set up, he's also trying to bust them out. So it's not a problem that anybody wants to inherit. And again, when it comes to the logistics, when it comes to the reality of it, people have a very different view on immigration than when those policymakers sit at that table and in Congress.
American correspondent and host of the Foreign Desk, Lisa Daftari, thanks so much for joining us today from Los Angeles.
My pleasure.
The University of Lethbridge has been a fixture in southern Alberta since it began in 1967, and since then, thousands of students have passed through its doors to go on to use their education to impact the lives of people in our province, our country, and beyond the borders. To talk more about the changes at the university and the impacts its students are making across the world is Dr. LeRoy Little Bear. Now, Dr. Little Bear has been the Vice Provost of Iniskim Indigenous Relations since 2022 and was the first Indigenous person to be quoted by the Supreme Court of Canada. His lifetime of accomplishments include some of the most important political achievements for Indigenous peoples in Canada and around the world. Very impressive. Dr. LeRoy Little Bear, welcome to Bridge City News. So great to have you on today.
Thank you very much for having me on your show.
Absolutely. So you have a long list of education and accolades. Your dedication to education, leadership, and community have led to a United Nations declaration, have changed the Constitution of Canada, and influenced the lives of thousands of students. So all of this, and you didn't even attend school for the first time until you were 10. Very, very inspiring. But is there one thing that you hold close to your heart as your greatest accomplishment?
Not really. I think it's a number of things that it's almost like once you get going and hey, things start to evolve. And so it's that evolution of these events and so on that have led up to things like being noticed, if I can put it that way, by the Supreme Court of Canada, and leading up to things like the Native American Studies Department at the University of Lethbridge, leading up to things like the Buffalo Treaty. I've got a copy of that, and the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. So it's really an involvement of all these events. Yes.
That's incredible. Okay, so you have a long history with the University of Lethbridge. So are there one or two things that really stand out in your mind as the biggest and best changes at the U of L?
Yes. Well, I tell people about how Native American Studies, which is now known as Indigenous Studies, started. And I would say the turning point was when the university was still over there sharing space with the Lethbridge College. I was walking down the hallway, and the president's office, Sam Smith, had his door open. He kind of had an open door policy. And he saw me coming down the hallway. And he says, "Hey, LeRoy, come on in. Let's have coffee." And I did. And he told me, "Hey, would you like to come out? I'd like to invite you. And would you like to come out for dinner at my place?" And he gave me the date, which is a couple of days later. And it was there, I thought he was just inviting me. And he, when I got there to his house, lo and behold, there was a whole bunch of faculty members there at his place and so on. And I thought to myself, he never told me that. I thought he was just inviting me. Being a student, I was always hungry. Yeah, I'll come for the food. Well, to make a long story short, he told us we've got a large Indigenous population surrounding our university, Lethbridge, and so on. This is Blackfoot country and so on. What can we do in cooperation with this Indigenous community and so on? And I was kind of put on the spot. I said to
Right
my, well, I'm just
in front of everybody too.
in front of everybody.
Yeah.
I said, I'm just a student here. Why don't you ask them? So, but it turned out that we had a summer job going out there to ask them. And that was where all the discussion around the development of an Indigenous program at the university. And you hardly hear about this back in the early 70s, see? And so the establishment of a full-fledged disciplinary department within the university, opening its door July 1st, 1975, was a big accomplishment for the university.
So that started the process where you were involved in helping establish the Native American Studies program at the U of L, which is now the Indigenous Studies program at the U of L. Yeah, that's incredible.
And we were a full-fledged disciplinary department. And hey, you never hear about that throughout the country back then. But now, especially with the impetus of the PRC, yes, you see Indigenous programs flowering, blossoming all over the place across the country. But U of L was the first one.
That's incredible. Now, when you think of younger Blackfoot generations, what is your hope for their future?
Well, my hope for their future is to come to institutions of higher learning, whether it be University of Lethbridge or elsewhere, but to make it comfortable for them, make it kind of like luxury for them to come to an institution, have the luxury to go to play around with ideas, concepts, and so on, so that, hey, when they leave the institution as graduates, hey, they'll become good contributing citizens. They'll become good, contributing members of their communities, and that's my hope for all the students that have come through. And so far, those students that have come through, that Indigenous students, hey, they're all employed.
That's incredible. Now, Dr. Little Bear, how do you see the work that you've done and the leadership that you've had as bridging the gap between cultures, not just at the university, but also on a national level?
Well, I see this as being given the opportunity. In other words, it wasn't just me. Well, there were leaders, for instance, Sam Smith that I referred to, and other presidents throughout the university that have given me and others the opportunity to come out and perform, so to speak, and play out this development, give ideas and so on. Hey, we've got an idea. Do you think this is something worthwhile we can do? And yes, they've jumped on, and Indigenous studies and all the happenings now on campus are blossoming and so on. But it's being given the opportunity.
Yeah, that's true. So I would imagine you were given opportunity, and then in turn you want to give opportunity to the younger generation. I know, was it Isaac Newton that coined the phrase standing on the shoulders of giants. So there might have been some giants that positioned you to have the view of the future, your future possibilities for your life. So can you talk about the individuals that provided you with an ability to see what your future could be like? I bet you could have never imagined back when you were a youngster.
Yes. Well, when I was young, and let's say I was living on a reserve, grew up there. I went to school there, residential school. But I did have my older relatives, elders that gave us guidance. My uncle Bernard, for instance, I spent many times, many days with him. And one of the things in his advice was, he said, I don't have any education. All the work that I do is sweat at the brow, breaking your back, hard labor type of work. Okay. I want you to go to school so that the way he put it was, you'll get paid for your thoughts.
I like that.
And yeah. But his caveat was, don't forget your people. That's the way he put it. And I've always operated by that advice.
Mm-hmm. How important was mentorship for you?
Oh, very, very important, because in our indigenous ways and our indigenous culture, our approach to education is out on the land. It's by actual experiential approaches. See? And so an example was, hey, we're out there cutting hay with the old style mowers and so on, even with a team of horses. Well, I was accompanying him, and one day he told me, okay, you've seen me do all this. It's now your turn. So it was through all the actual experience and so on. But then a large part of it also was the being able to speak my own language fluently. And so kind of like the thought processes that are brought about by the language. And that consequently, that rubbed off on me. And today, I really push for the notion of language. I really push for and try to educate people about thinking processes, metaphysics, paradigms and so on, because those are the foundational basis of thought processes.
Mm-hmm, absolutely. What does mentorship in 2023 look like now compared to back when you were younger and receiving the mentorship?
Well, the view today, and especially of young people, it seems like there's to some extent, we had a large number of our older people, but they're seeing that those older people, those elders, are passing. Mm-hmm. And so there's now kind of an urgency on their part, that is the youth, to have elders with them, because in the future, we, the young, are also going to be the elders. So we better try and learn as much as we can of our culture, our language, in addition to the education that we're getting at these institutions of higher learning, because in the not too distant future, we'll be being referred to as elders. So the youth are taking it serious, because they're seeing these elders passing away, and there's fewer and fewer of them.
Right. I want to switch gears for a minute here and just to talk about the successes of the university here in Lethbridge. So it's been rated as a top 6 university in the world. So who or what do you think can be credited for this high rating?
Well, my response to that is that the university has its foundational base as liberal education. Liberal education gives you a broad base to draw from.
Sure.
Okay. As opposed to, specialization. Say. So specialization is great if you want to know something really in depth. But generally speaking, what happens then is when you specialize too much, you might know everything within your specialty, but not much outside of the specialty. See, but a liberal education gives you a broad overview, which means you can come up with creative new ideas drawing on different parts of different foundational bases. And so it's that, let me put it this way, that's what brings about leadership, good leaders. See. Yeah. And I think that's what really is important about how University of Lethbridge brings about knowledge and education to its students.
Very interesting. Dr. Little Bear, looks like we are out of time here, but thanks so much for joining us today.
My pleasure.
Absolutely. That was Dr. LeRoy Little Bear, Vice Provost of Iniskim Indigenous Relations at the University of Lethbridge. I'm Jeanette Roche on behalf of all of us here at Bridge City News. Thanks so much for watching.